Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. This is part two of recapping every team's draft class in the NFL draft. Yesterday, we brought you the NFC, so if you haven't seen that, make sure to check it out. And today is the AFC, and we're going to start right from the top. The first AFC team to make a selection was the Houston Texans. There was so much debate about are they going to go quarterback? Are they not? And we really all collectively got fooled into thinking that for some reason they wouldn't. But they made the right choice. CJ Stroud is a great quarterback prospect, and they picked him. But then they did something really interesting, and that was trade a boatload of picks for Will Anderson, moving up from number 12 to number 3. And if you look at the trade chart, giving the equivalent of a 1.1, the first overall pick for Will Anderson, which it was a lot. So just before we get into the rest of the draft, how do you feel about how those couple picks transpired for the Texans?
So in a vacuum, right, CJ Stroud and Will Anderson are two great, potentially franchise-changing players. So I love the players. Stroud was my QB2. Anderson was my best or my top defensive player. So I love the picks on their own. But giving up that much to go get Will Anderson when you could have sat at 12 and, they don't know how the board's going to fall. But at 12, they could have gotten a guy who I valued pretty highly in Nolan Smith, who, obviously I didn't like as much as Will Anderson, but I would have much rather taken Stroud at 2, waited till 12 to take a guy like Nolan Smith, and then kept next year's first round pick because we were talking about this last night. Next year's first round pick could be potentially very high in the draft.
Yeah, I think that it's really all going to be determined by what that pick is. I really struggle for this to be the correct move if that pick ends up being in the top 5, God forbid, in the top 2, especially with the value of those picks, with Caleb Williams and Drake May likely being the top 2 picks in that draft. So, overall, I agree with you. I love picking Stroud. I think picking Anderson was a good move, but they just gave up a little bit too much. That being said, I just want to address a common counterpoint that this trade might have been for CJ Stroud and not for Will Anderson because Will Anderson was the Texans' guy. If they only had one pick, it seems like they would have picked Will Anderson, but they had to pick CJ Stroud first because otherwise they would have to give up even more if there was a competition, from other teams looking to pick CJ Stroud at number 3 if he was still available. The way I see this though is they picked CJ Stroud at 2. They could have just not picked Will Anderson. Even if supposedly he was their guy, it doesn't change that they did give that up for Will Anderson because there was a scenario in which they picked CJ Stroud at 2, and then they wait until 12 to make their next selection. So I just wanted to clarify that bit.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to note. Highlighting a couple of their other picks, Tank Dell, I think in round 3 was a really, really good pick for them. And then I also like Henry To'o in I think it was round 5, which I also thought was really good value. So I think solid draft overall, really good players, just gave up too much to get Anderson.
Yep, I love Xavier Hutchinson in round 6 as well. So they had some, they added a lot of talent in this draft. I won't deny that at all. Moving on to the Colts, this was a pretty Chris Ballard type draft. We know that he values traits over anything else, and if you just look at some of the testing numbers from the players in this draft class, it's off the charts. This draft is really going to be determined by what happens with Anthony Richardson. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch him develop. I don't know if I would have picked him that high. I think I would, if I was Indianapolis, I would have been a little bit more aggressive moving into the top 2 picks to get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, especially because they were really within striking distance at 4th overall. But he was my QB3. I don't blame them for making that pick. They finally got up there in the draft order. They really had to go get a quarterback. After that, there were a couple picks that I just didn't love. I don't love Julius Brents in the 2nd round. I think that he lacks route anticipation, and although he has great short area explosiveness, I don't love his long speed either, so that was a little bit of a reach. Josh Downs was solid in round 3, though, and then Blake Freeland, Adi Adebare was a really good pick, and so was Darius Rush. So overall, just a solid draft, not great draft, that's going to be determined by Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I mean, like you were talking about, right? Richardson was our quarterback 3. I didn't have him valued that high at a late first round pick. or a first round value on Anthony Richardson, but it, it's just how the quarterbacks work in the NFL draft. You have to overdraft that quarterback, and the Colts really had to draft a quarterback. They really didn't have another option. Uh, I'm just gonna be under the assumption that they did whatever they could to trade up to number one, and the Panthers just were able to make a better offer. And like you mentioned, Anthony Richardson's going to determine this draft. If Anthony Richardson turns out to be a star, it's probably going to be considered an A draft by most people. But if he ends up not working out, then the draft obviously won't be valued as highly. But they did make a few number of really good picks in the later or the mid to later rounds, and I think the only really egregious pick was Brent's in round two.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's move on to the Jaguars, who I think also had a solid but not great draft. Anton Harrison, I really like that selection in the first round, especially being able to trade back twice and still get him. He was kind of like the last tackle that I felt really confident about being a good NFL starter. So that was a huge get. I didn't love what they did in day two, though. I think Brenton Strange was a tad early at the end of round two, although he will bring some good blocking ability, which is nice. I don't really get why they picked Tank Bigsby in round three, especially with Travis Etienne on a rookie contract for another couple of years. Then on day three, they had a couple picks that I want to highlight that I really liked. Antonio Johnson, the safety from Texas A&M, and Parker Washington, the wide receiver from Penn State, I think can be valuable contributors for them. So overall, a solid draft.
Yeah, I think Harrison, it seemed like he was a little bit undervalued by most draft analysts, and I had a 2.0 on him, so that borderline round two grade, obviously in my top 32 players, so he definitely deserved to be in round one. It was nice to see him get taken there, and I think he's really going to help out that Jaguars offensive line, who now is going to enter the season without either of their starting tackles, and you really need to protect your investment in Trevor Lawrence. Moving on to the last team in the AFC South, the Tennessee Titans, who in the first round they took Peter Skoronski, the tackle from Northwestern. In round two, they traded up a couple picks to take Will Levis, who fell out of round one. Round three was Tyjae Spears. Round five was Josh Wiley, and another pick in round six, Jalen Duncan, the tackle from Maryland. So Skoronski to me was a really safe pick in round one. He fills a need. One of the best offensive linemen available. I project him as a tackle. I know you do as well. A lot of people were talking about him as at guard. If I were the Texans, I'd just play him where he feels most comfortable. Because I think they have, or the Titans, my bad. Because I think they have needs at both spots of the offensive line, but I would lean towards offensive tackle potentially to replace Taylor Lewan. Will Levis, I wasn't a huge fan of. We knew he was going to get picked in round two. I don't see him as, I see him as a pretty big, a pretty long shot to become a true franchise quarterback. And he wasn't my fourth quarterback. I had Hendon Hooker ahead of him. I would have liked to see Hooker go to Tennessee more, especially because he would have been able to sit a year behind Ryan Tannehill. But, we'll see what happens with this Will Levis pick.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. For me, Skoronski was a real solid pick. They really needed offensive line help. I'm just afraid he's the only starter on this team when we look at the depth chart in 3 to 4 years coming from this draft class. Just because Will Levis was expected to go in the first round doesn't necessarily mean that, this was a really good pick at the top of round two. He's still a guy that I had graded a good deal lower than that because to me, he struggles to read the field. He struggles with anticipation and timing and sensing pressure. And these are issues that have yet to develop after a lengthy college career with multiple seasons of starting experience, which is just why I'm worried about his projection to the NFL. And after that, there was just no pick that really stood out to me too much. Moving on now to the AFC West, the Las Vegas Raiders had probably the best first two rounds that you could possibly have. Quite simply, at both their first two picks, they picked the top player available on my big board, which is really astounding. And that seventh overall, that was Tyree Wilson, the defensive end from Texas Tech. You're adding him to a pass rush that already has Chandler Jones and Max Crosby. That's pretty incredible. And there was some talk that They were looking at potentially trading down from 7 to 12. They had an offer from the Cardinals who wanted to move back up for Paris Johnson. Even though they ended up doing that with one pick earlier, the Lions, and they would have picked Anton Harrison at 12. And even though I like Harrison, I like just sticking there, taking one of the last blue chip prospects on the board in Tyree Wilson. Round 2, Michael Meyer. That was a fantastic pick. I had a pick, a grade on him just outside the top 10. So that's astounding. Thought the rest of the draft was pretty underwhelming with, Byron Young, the DTs from Alabama in round 3, Trey Tucker, Aiden O'Connell, a developmental quarterback in round 4. Nothing crazy, but the first 2 rounds just stand out so much and make that draft class a hit.
Yeah, I mean, they crushed it taking Wilson. I know, he fell from the top 3 because of, some foot concerns with his injured foot. Hopefully that's all resolved because, he really has top end edge rusher talent. And then Michael Mayer, like you mentioned, my tight end 1. I haven't really heard a reason as to why he fell out of the first round. Normally when stuff like that happens, we hear injury, or something that, teams weren't as high on him as the media. And it just seemed like it happened for no true reason. But a great pick for the Raiders in round 2 that fills a huge need after trading away Darren Waller. And it kind of makes that trade of Darren Waller seem like not so bad anymore, knowing that Waller's turning 30 and now you have Michael Mayer coming in. But I agree. After that, nothing really noteworthy. I think O'Connell was a solid pick to make just because you do have Jimmy Garoppolo who, gets injured almost every year. So it's important to have a reliable backup in there. And I think O'Connell could be that for them. Moving on to the Chargers now, a few of their notable picks. First round, they took Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver from TCU. Second round, they took Tuli Tuipulotu, the edge rusher from USC. Third round, Dan Henley, linebacker from Washington State. And then a couple of their day 3 picks, Darius Davis and Jordan McFadden. So the Chargers, to me, was just a really just average draft. I don't think any of their picks were, big reaches. I don't think any of their picks were great value picks. For me, my favorite pick was Tui Pelotu from USC. I had him as early to mid second round grade, and they got him, towards the end of round 2. So I think he has potential to be a solid starting edge rusher for them. But other than that, I wasn't a big fan. I think Johnston went a little bit earlier than I would have liked, and he was taken ahead of, Jordan Addison, who I'd have liked to, who I thought should have gone ahead of Johnston.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think they're going to get 3 starters in Johnston, Tuipulotu, and Henley, but I don't really expect any of them to be real stars. And now moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs. I like what they did in round 1 with a player that wasn't necessarily mocked in round 1 too often, but I thought deserved to go in the opening night, and that was Felix Anudike-Uzomah, the defensive end from Kansas State. He's just so well-rounded, plays a premium position, made sense for him to slide into round 1. After that, what really stands out to me for their day 2 picks is that they were willing to roll the dice on inconsistent players with some reported character concerns in Rashee Rice, the wide receiver from SMU, and Wanya Morris, the tackle from Oklahoma. I know that the Chiefs have the type of culture, especially with all the winning that happens in Kansas City nowadays, to be able to accommodate players with a little bit of risk in that regard. There just were some other directions they could have gone that were, better, safer prospects.
Yeah, the Chiefs draft to me was a little bit underwhelming. I was not as high on Anudike-Uzomah as you were, but I still, I think it's a decent pick for the Chiefs. But other than that, you mentioned a lot of players with some character concerns and nothing really noteworthy to me from the Chiefs draft. The Broncos, who, despite not having, a first round pick, I think they had a really stellar draft. Their first pick, which was at the end of round 2, was Marvin Mims, the wide receiver from Oklahoma. At the start of round 3, they took Drew Sanders, the linebacker from Arkansas. Their other round 3 pick, they took Riley Moss. And then in day 3, they took J.L. Skinner, the safety from Boise State, and Alex Forsyth, center from Oregon. Sanders, I had a first round grade on. I know you did as well. Not a lot of people really saw Sanders the way we did uh, as a linebacker prospect. I think he's super athletic. He brings potential as a blitzer, and he's a recent convert to linebacker after playing edge rusher at Alabama before transferring. So that was a great pick, one of the best value picks in my opinion in the entire draft. Marvin Mims is going to bring a lot of depth to that wide receiver room, which in a vacuum it was a great pick. I'm just not sure how often he's going to see the field because they have a lot of talent in that wide receiver room already, but still, one of the best players on the board at the time of the pick, so you can't really complain too much.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to that pick happened without a trade of Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy with all the talk around that all offseason, but it's still a solid value pick. I like Marvin Mims a lot, and I think he'll be a good value, especially operating out of the slot. Drew Sanders was, one of the best picks the entire draft, like you said it. I would liken him to a poor man's Micah Parsons, a guy who he has a lot of pass rush ability because of his defensive end background. And he's still learning the linebacker position. He might not be as good in year one as in year three, but I see a really high impact starter who offers rare pass rush ability from the linebacker position. Riley Moss was a solid pick. So were JL Skinner. A good draft for the Broncos. And there's kind of a theme in this draft of several teams that didn't have a first round pick, but ended up making out really well, which means that you got to focus on the other days too, because you can end up building a really good draft class with players that are going to impact your team without even making a selection in round one. And the draft is truly a 3-day event. And now let's move on to the AFC North, where we start off with the Baltimore Ravens, who opened up the draft with Zay Flowers in the first round, the wide receiver from Boston College, and followed that up with Trenton Simpson in round 3, linebacker from Clemson, Tavius Robinson, D-end from Ole Miss in round 4, Q Blue Kelly, cornerback from Stanford in round 5, and another pick that really stands out was Andrew Voorhees, the guard from USC in round 7, because he tore his ACL at the combine, is probably going to miss his whole rookie year, but he was regarded as a potential day 2 pick heading in. So that's a really good value if they just stay patient and see their dividends get returned in a year or two for him. Flowers was a solid pick. I don't know if he was quite a first round prospect because he's not a guy who you're going to be able to have in jump ball situations, for example. His size limits him a little bit, but he's just so athletic and such a good route runner. So I think it was important to get a receiver to help Lamar Jackson. They gave him that big contract the same day of the draft, so it was only fitting that they addressed that position that night for him. And then Trenton Simpson was an intriguing pick. I wasn't always the biggest fan because I didn't think that his instincts were really up to par with his athleticism. But in the 3rd round, I think it's worth a shot. And he's pretty similar to Patrick Queen. The linebacker that they drafted from LSU is just probably a better value than where they got Queen in the 1st round a couple of years ago.
Yeah, to me, it seems like he might end up being the Patrick Queen replacement. I don't think they picked up his 5th-year option, and it seems like he's going to be walking in free agency after this year. So I think getting, a starting linebacker, a potential starting linebacker replacement in round 3 is, really solid value. And then the Voorhees pick, I'm glad that he got drafted. It really sucks to see someone, have a serious injury like that at the combine. So good for him. And the Ravens seem to really take it. I don't want to say take advantage of the fact that people get injured, but they really get great value picks from players that end up falling because they get injured in the pre-draft process.
Like Ojabo.
Yeah, Ojabo. And I think they do a really good job of looking at value in players that might have fallen for reasons outside of their on the field play. Moving on to the Bengals. The end of round 1, they took Myles Murphy, the defensive end from Clemson. End of round 2, DJ Turner, cornerback from Michigan. Jordan Battle in round 3, and then a couple of day 3 picks in Charlie Jones and Chase Brown, the running back from Illinois. To me, the Bengals had a really solid draft. I thought Myles Murphy was good value at the end of round 1. I think he's going to upgrade that defensive line that already has quite a bit of talent. And to me, I thought DJ Turner was a good pick in round 2 as well. I think a secondary that lost quite a few pieces in free agency. Turner will probably end up being a starter for them. And I think that he will upgrade that secondary as well.
Yeah, I agree with you on those couple picks. And Charlie Jones was the one I wanted to highlight in round four because I didn't scout him individually, but several times when I was watching other players in the Big Ten, he was popping off the screen. So that's usually a good sign. And I think he could definitely slide into that wide receiver three role that Tyler Boyd currently occupies once Boyd potentially walks in free agency in a year. And that, that's a valuable position for the Bengals, given the attention that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are going to command. So I'm excited to see him develop. And now moving on to the Browns, they didn't pick in the first two rounds, but I thought they had a really good draft. Starting off with Cedric Tillman, who I never imagined would fall as far as 74th, but he's a solid pick there. I mean, he's got size, he's got speed. You just got to make sure he transitions correctly into an NFL scheme and learns how to run, more crisp routes and more of a diverse route tree. They also got Siaki Ika in the third round, really good run stuffer. It doesn't have a ton of pass rushing upside, but probably a starter for them. And in round four, they made one of my favorite picks of the draft, and this is DeJuan Jones, a tackle from Ohio State. He really hurt himself in the pre-draft process because after having a fantastic day one of practice at the Senior Bowl, he shut it down the rest of the week, didn't participate in the combine, didn't participate in his pro day, responded very poorly in some interviews. He told the team that his dream is to play in the NBA and not the NFL. So, there might be some motivation concerns, maybe some concerns with his weight also because he's just a tremendously large human being. But you just turn on that tape. To me, it was first round quality. Like, then that is not an exaggeration. In my eyes, that was the quality of his tape. To get him in the fourth round is such a steal and could really, really pay off. And another pick I want to highlight, actually multiple picks, because this was just such a good deep draft for the Browns. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, quarterback from UCLA in round 5, one of my personal favorites in this draft. I don't know if he's going to be able to get on the field with Deshaun Watson there. I would have preferred him going to a team that had a little bit shakier of a quarterback one position. But, if you can play at quarterback in the NFL, you're going to find your way on the field at one point, be it for the team that drafted you or someone else. I bet at one point in his career, Thompson Robinson surprises us with his play on the field. And one last pick, Luke Whippler in round 6. That was a good pick.
Yeah, the Browns, despite not having, picks in the first two rounds, like you mentioned, really solid draft. Another team that I thought had a really great draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers,
Oh, yeah.
who in round 1 moved up 3 spots to jump the Jets to take Broderick Jones, the tackle from Georgia. At the top of round 2, the pick they got from the Chase Claypool trade, they got Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback from Penn State. With their own second-round pick in round 2, they got Keanu Benton. And then in round 3, they got a steal in Darnell Washington. And then Nick Herbig at the end of round 4. So the Steelers had a lot of picks, and I think they hit on every single one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, this is my favorite draft class. If I gotta rank them all, this is number 1, just ahead of the Philadelphia Eagles. I absolutely love what the Steelers did. They just gave up just a 4th rounder to move up for Broderick Jones at a position they really needed help. Porter, great pick. Benson, great pick. Washington, talk about a really high value pick considering the current state of that team where Najee Harris is a guy you invested a first round pick in a couple years ago. He's not really living up to those expectations fully just because you pick a running back in the first round. You want him to be, top 5, top 10 in his position. I think this could be the pick that gets him over the edge. Makes their run blocking a lot better than it has been because Washington is just that good of a blocker. Nick Herbig can really bring some pass rush ability too. And it's a contract year for Alex Highsmith. So if they're intrigued by what he brings, they could potentially let Highsmith walk and replace him in the starting lineup with Herbig. So, and one more pick, round 7, they got Corey Trice, who's the huge cornerback from Purdue, a guy that I really like too. This was just fantastic draft where they nailed every pick, and it was super impressive on their part.
Yeah, it's worth noting for me that the Steelers, their top 4 selections, all 4 players were in my top 32 on my
Wow.
big board. So that is huge for them. And I mean, yeah, you could end up seeing 5 starters from this draft class.
Yep.
So great job by the Steelers. Moving on to the AFC East, we just mentioned that the Steelers jumped the Jets to take Broderick Jones. Talking about the Jets draft now, who with their first round pick, they took Will McDonald, the defensive end from Iowa State. In the second round, Joe Tippmann, the center from Wisconsin. Round 4, Carter Warren, tackle from Pittsburgh. Round 5, Israel Abanikanda, the running back from Pittsburgh in round 7, Zach Kuntz, the tight end from Old Dominion. Uh, as a Jets fan, I was really disappointed with this first round pick. Um, it really seems like they needed help along that offensive line, and I think everyone in the NFL knew that. And that's kind of why they ended up getting jumped. That's why I wasn't a fan of them trading down 2 spots with the Packers to get behind the Patriots, because if anyone's going to mess with the Jets draft plans, it's going to be the Patriots. But I think, in round 2, I think they made a really solid pick with Joe Tippmann. I think he's going to be the starting center. He was the best center on my board, and I think it was really fair value there. I actually like the Abanikanda pick in round 5. I thought it was good value. I think he projects as a solid running back 2. And then, it's good to have some depth there, especially with Brees Hall coming back from the ACL injury. And I think Zach Kuntz was fair value in round 7. But, a disappointing draft from the Jets, I think, if you're really looking at the potential they had at 15th overall.
Yeah, I think that's a pick I can't get on board with either. Will McDonald is a really fast edge rusher with really long arms, but I think it kind of stops there right now. He's not really refined. He's not really powerful either. So I struggle to see him even being able to start in the first year of his career. So maybe he can develop really well, and that's what the Jets will be hoping for. But I think 15 was way too rich for him. I did like the Tippmann pick though in round 2, as you said. Moving on to the Patriots. The Patriots had a fantastic first few picks just from a value standpoint. Christian Gonzalez was my 5th ranked player. He was available at 14. Not only do they trade back 3 spots, but they still get him. And he at 17, so 12 spots later than where I had him ranked. Fills a need, and especially in a cornerback room where most of those guys are smaller players. He's a big body who can size up with whoever the wide receiver one is on the opposing team. And I really like that pick. In round 2, the Patriots spent less than 60 seconds on the clock before turning in their pick. And reportedly, there were 3 to 4 players that they were okay drafting at 14 in the first round, which is why they moved down to 17. One of those players was Keon White, who they ended up getting a whole round later. I had him graded inside my top 20 players at number 17. They get him at 46. So talk about another outstanding value, especially with Josh Uche in a contract year. Maybe White takes over in a year if Uche walks in free agency. Round 3, Marte Mapu, one of my guys that I only got too late, but I really like him a lot. He's such a solid player who brings a lot in man coverage from the linebacker position. Also a big need for the Patriots. On day 3 there's the notable kicker pick in round 4, which I explained yesterday on the pod why I'm not really a fan of picking kickers that early. So that wasn't a pick that I was too thrilled about as a Patriots fan. Added a few depth pieces on the interior offensive line, which was good to see. Kayshon Boutte was an interesting pick that I want to highlight. A guy who we saw as a potential first rounder heading into the season. He had a disappointing season. Seemed to have a falling out with the coaching staff and the program at LSU. Initially announced he was returning to school and then said, never mind, going to enter the draft. But he's a really talented player who in the 6th round could be a real steal. He was worth a shot there. I love the value of the Patriots picks, especially the first 2 with Gonzalez and White. My just one reservation is that this is a huge year for Mac Jones, and there should have been a little bit more done in the draft to help him. Maybe that 3rd round pick, as good as Mapu is, maybe should have gone to a receiver or at least gone on the offensive side of the ball, because the priority should have been Mac Jones's breakout in year 3, which is going to be key to this organization's success.
Yeah, I think you said most of it with the Patriots picks. I'm interested to see what role Christian Gonzalez fills. He kind of, when the Patriots made that pick, I kind of wondered if he's going to slide into that Stephon Gilmore role that the Patriots had, when they had Stephon Gilmore. So, like you mentioned, the first 3 picks, really great value. But then after that, I feel like it was a normal Patriots draft where they're taking a lot of swings on the later rounds. Moving on to the Buffalo Bills. They traded up a couple spots in round 1 to jump the Cowboys to take Dalton Kincaid, which we talked about yesterday. The end of round 2, they got Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida. Round 3, Dorian Williams. Round 5, Justin Shorter, wide receiver from Florida. And round 7, Nick Broker, the guard from Ole Miss. Despite having Michael Mayer as my tight end 1, I think Dalton Kincaid was still a really good pick at the end of round 1.
Okay.
I think that he brings a dynamic receiving role to the tight end room, and it'll be interesting to see if Buffalo runs two tight end sets now with Kincaid in the mix. I think Torrance was a great pick at the end of round two. I think he's going to help improve that offensive line that I think isn't too bad to begin with. Um, but other than that, I don't think there were too many notable picks. But I think they really hit on the first two rounds.
Totally agree. Kincaid is such a good ad. Can really take that offense to another level, especially when you consider the few red zone interceptions that Josh Allen threw. If he has Dalton Kincaid there, capable of separating from man coverage really quickly as a receiver and also offering a larger target in the red zone, that was just such a smart pick to get ahead of the Cowboys and make that pick. And in the second round, I was surprised Cyrus Torrance fell that far. I had a first round grade on him. I think he's going to be a really solid blocker. So they nailed those first two picks, as you said. Now let's move on to the last team that we're going to be recapping, the Miami Dolphins, who made just 4 picks in the entire NFL draft. I was not a huge fan of Cam Smith in the second round at pick 50, but my bigger issue with the pick was just that had to be a trade down. With 4 picks total, I would have liked to see them, add another pick or two by moving down in the draft order there. I did like the Devon Achane pick in round 3. If you just think about Mike McDaniel's rushing scheme, zone scheme, with a lot of faster running backs that are capable of having big holes to run through. Devon Achane fits very nicely there and should be able to make some explosive plays for the Dolphins. And I think he could even become their starter this season.
Yeah, I think all the running backs in the Dolphins offense all seem to have almost the exact same skill set.
Yeah.
They probably won't. They probably won't run between the tackles at all. You know, this season because everybody's an outside zone runner. But I agree. I don't think you can really leave any draft making 4 picks. And 50th overall is not super low, where you can still get some good value in later picks by trading out of 50.
Yeah.
So I completely agree. And I don't think the Dolphins have enough talent on that team where they can make 4 picks. I think, especially offense, I think they're really talented. Defense, I think there's some things left to be desired. I know they traded for Jalen Ramsey, but that's maybe probably a 1 year thing. So I would have liked to see them add at a minimum more depth pieces to that defense, and I don't really think they did that with this draft. Obviously, they only drafted one defensive player, so.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one. That was my primary concern with their draft class. So that makes it all 32 teams. It's been a crazy ride from starting to watch these guys last summer to then getting into their final tape from December onwards. And, we're almost at the end of the road of our 2023 NFL draft content. We've got a couple more of these divisional recap posts to go up on Instagram. And then after that, as crazy as it sounds, we'll be starting to bring you guys a couple of sneak peek previews of 2024 prospects. It's going to be a fun class at the very top. We're talking Caleb Williams, Drake May, Ola Fashanu, Jared Verse. Both those guys were expected to be top 15 picks if they declared. Kind of surprisingly, it went back. You also got Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver from Ohio State, Dallas Turner, the DN from Alabama. It's going to be a fun class to watch, so I'm getting already excited. But this was the 2023 draft recap. And Alex, do you want to say any one more thing about this draft class that we're done with here?
Yeah, I just kind of want to talk about a little bit the fact that you brought this up earlier. There are quite a few teams that didn't have first or even second round picks, but they were able to find value
Yeah.
with guys that fell. And I think we see guys that fall every year for various reasons, and it's probably really not falling to these NFL teams because they obviously didn't have them ranked that highly, but at least to us they fell. So I think there's a lot of potential to get 4 or 5 starters out of a draft class without having multiple first or multiple second round picks. I think you know you can really upgrade and improve your team with one draft. You just have to make the right picks. I know that sounds a little cliche, but it totally can happen because guys that are talented and have true starting potential always end up falling.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that might make teams more comfortable with trading away a first rounder for a really good deal, a really good player, because they're confident in their scouting abilities to fill out the roster with the remaining picks. And there are a lot of good players available, second, third, and even beyond that in the NFL draft. So that's a good point there. I think that concludes our 2023 NFL Draft AFC recap. Make sure to check out the NFC one as well, which was posted yesterday. And yeah, it was a great time. It's a little sad that it's over, but we'll be shifting our focus, as I said, to 2024 just to get another one in the books and headed to another draft class a year from now. It's going to be fun.
Oh yeah, it'll be fun. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode, hopefully pretty soon. Once we have some stuff to talk about regarding draft content. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for